A country that imports around 5 million barrels of oil a day through Hormuz should be screaming for this war to end. China is that country, and yet if you want to understand China's endgame in the Iran war, that fact is only the beginning, not the conclusion. Because Beijing is living inside a strategic paradox. The war is hurting China, the war may also be helping China. And the whole logic of Chinese behavior in this crisis sits inside that contradiction. On the most basic level, China's interest is obvious. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important exposed points in China's energy system. Before the war, nearly a quarter of China's daily oil consumption moved through that corridor. If the route becomes dangerous, China's economy feels it. Factories feel it. Logistics feel it. Market planning feels it. And because a lot of Iranian oil goes to China at a discount, Beijing is not just losing supply when the route is disrupted. It is losing favorable supply. So if you read the situation only from the angle of energy, the answer seems simple. China should want the fighting to stop immediately, the route reopen, and the whole crisis cooled down before the damage gets worse. And on one level, that is true, but it is not the whole truth, because while the war is raising China's costs, it is also exposing something Beijing has wanted the world to see for years. The United States can still apply force, but it is becoming worse at translating force into stable political order. That is the opening China sees. Think about the American performance in this conflict from the outside. Trump says the war is ending, then it is not. A ceasefire is announced, then it partly collapses. A deal is hinted at, then the goalposts move. Naval pressure rises. Rhetoric escalates. Allies hesitate. The war continues. The message to the world is not strength. The message is unpredictability, and that matters far beyond Iran, because the deeper contest between China and the United States is not only about weapons, GDP, or technology. It is also about who looks like the safer organizing power in an unstable century. Usually Beijing has to work hard to make that case. It has to point out American inconsistency, interventionism, sanctions, alliance fatigue, and selective principles. It has to persuade governments that U.S. leadership is becoming unreliable. Right now, Washington is doing the demonstration work itself. That is why the war is strategically useful to China, even as it is materially painful. Every extra week of American entanglement in a conflict with blurry objectives and unstable messaging makes the U.S. look less like the global grown-up and more like a combustible giant, still capable of destruction, but no longer clearly capable of control. That is a gift to Beijing. Not because China loves the war, because it loves the contrast. Look at the positioning. America speaks in the language of overwhelming force, total targets, decisive punishment, and near-term victory. China speaks in the language of calls, plans, de-escalation, and stability. The substance of Chinese diplomacy may be thin, but the image is not. And in geopolitics, image is often the first step to structural advantage. China does not need the world to believe it is morally superior. It only needs the world to start believing it is less reckless. That is enough to move a lot of countries. Europe starts doubting American steadiness. Asian allies start recalculating what security dependence really means. Middle Eastern states start asking whether Washington still supplies order or whether it increasingly exports strategic volatility. And all of that creates space for China, space in trade, space in diplomacy, space in long-term alignment. This matters especially in the Gulf, where China has spent years quietly becoming more important. It buys oil, yes, but it also sells infrastructure, electronics, vehicles, industrial products, telecom systems, and logistical connectivity. It invests in desalination, it invests in ports, it invests in the commercial plumbing of the region. That means China does not need to dominate the Gulf militarily to become indispensable there. It only needs Gulf governments to feel that dependence on Washington is riskier than it used to be, and that diversified partnership with Beijing is more useful than it used to be. This war helps push them toward that conclusion. That is one half of China's endgame. The other half is more dangerous. Beijing wants the United States to keep paying the political price of this war, not indefinitely, not to the point of total systemic collapse, but long enough that America's reputation, alliance structure, and aura of indispensable competence take real damage. That is the sweet spot. A war bad enough to expose the limits of American management, but not so bad that the whole global trading order falls apart, because China has one huge problem that people forget when they talk loosely about Beijing benefiting from every American failure. China still depends on the system. It is the world's factory floor. It exports everything from industrial machinery to consumer goods, from EVs to electronics. That model needs shipping lanes, insurance, finance, competence, and energy reliability. If the war in Iran pushes the global system too close to chaos, China suffers alongside everyone else. That is why Beijing's position looks contradictory. It wants the war to stop. It also wants the United States to keep discrediting itself a little longer. It wants Iran to survive. It does not want to become Iran's direct military partner. It wants to look like the stable power. It does not want to inherit the full costs of policing a disorderly system. It wants a weaker American world order. It does not want the entire order to collapse before China has finished building the alternatives. That is the paradox. And once you understand that paradox, a lot of smaller things start making more sense. For example, why might China quietly help Iran without openly joining the war? Because Beijing does not need Iran to win spectacularly. It only needs Iran not to break. If Iran collapses quickly, America gets to claim decisive force still works. If Iran survives, absorbs the punishment, and keeps the United States trapped in an ugly, expensive, politically corrosive conflict, China gains. So if Beijing can help Iran stay in the fight from one step back, through ambiguity, distance, denial, and carefully managed support that may be strategically ideal. Enough involvement to shape the balance, not enough involvement to own the battlefield. That is not heroic strategy, it is cold strategy. Now zoom out even further. What kind of world does China actually want to come out of this? Not a world where Iran wins some grand civilizational victory. Not a world where America is totally gone. Not a world of total chaos. China's best case outcome is subtler than that. It wants the world to come out of this crisis believing that the United States is still powerful, but no longer automatically wise. That, sauce. Force is still dangerous, but no longer reliably productive. That alliances under Washington now come with more doubt, more anxiety, and more hedging. That China, without firing the dominant shots, is increasingly the more predictable commercial and diplomatic pole, and that the future international system will not be unipolar, but hedged, transactional, and regionally layered in ways that advantage Beijing. That is the long game. China does not need to replace America in one move. It only needs America to become less automatic, less trusted, less central, less able to convert power into order. If that happens, Beijing does not have to conquer the system. It can inherit more and more of its useful parts, while the US discredits its own claim to steward the whole thing. That is why this war matters so much. It is not just an oil story. It is not just an Iran story. It is a reputational war for the architecture of the next world order. And right now, China is trying to walk the narrowest line possible inside that war. It wants the conflict painful enough to reprice America in the eyes of the world, but not so destructive that it burns down the global platform China still needs. That is the endgame, not victory, not peace at any price, a managed storm, a weaker American image, a more useful China, and a world that comes out of the crisis looking less to Washington for automatic leadership and more to Beijing as the power that can profit from order without having to blow it up first.